Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.
Seeing the way in which readers who have such passion and such an interest and such a depth of knowledge about these worlds recontextualize or reinterpret these stories in ways that neither the author nor me or anyone else involved in the story could ever have imagined it. And it's this kind of wonderful, beautiful thing that happens.
Hello there. This is Dave, and I'm an original trilogy kid.
And this is Alora. I'm a prequel trilogy kid. Welcome to What Does Star Wars Mean to You, the show where we talk to all kinds of fans of Star Wars to take the hate out of the debate and look at the franchise from a certain point of view, one fan at a time. Who do we have today, Dave?
Today, I'm really excited because we have the senior editor at Random House Publishing. He's worked on a ton of licensed properties, including Magic the Gathering, World of Warcraft, and, of course, Star Wars.
Oh, Star Wars, really?
Yes. Why would we have him on?
That's an interesting take.
He's worked with such authors as Timothy Zahn, Rebecca Roanhorse, Delilah S. Dawson, Cavan Scott, Christy Golden, and Madeline Rue, and I'm sure a ton of others.
Oh, so many more.
His bio says that he manages 2 senior interns who happen to be cats, and he cannot ride a bicycle. And I did not say his name yet, although, to be fair.
No, you're just building up the suspense. Everyone's like, who is it? Who is it? They're all taking guesses.
Yeah. The funny part is, it is the name of the episode. Tom Hoeler, What Does Star Wars Mean to You? So
we didn't really bury the lead there, but no, it is. It's Tom, and he is a delight to talk to. It was funny, you were listing off all the authors, and I recall in our conversation that he kept bringing up different novels, and I'd be like, oh, I have that one, next to me on my desk. And and he was like, you just have all of the books I've worked on? I'm like, apparently, I didn't know.
Well, let's go to him.
Yes, I think let's let everyone else hear how delightful Tom is.
Yes. Luke, we're going to have company.
Tom, are you ready to share with the world what Star Wars means to you?
Yes.
That's our favorite answer around here. So we like to kick off with 5 with the Force, which is kind of like our standard set of 5 semi-rapid fire questions to get your Star Wars baseline. Which movie is your guilty pleasure?
Oh, man. I would say in part nature because of the nature of the work that I do, it's like that guilty pleasure changes from time to time, depending on which movie I might be delving into more and more. But obviously right now, my guilty pleasure is obviously Rogue One because of the just oodles of added context that the 2 seasons of Andor have not now given it. And in working on the Reign of the Empire series, which is kind of pushing itself towards that time period, I am constantly referring back to that. And it also is one of those movies, too, that because it came out in 2016, and there was just a period of time where I didn't watch it at all for no real reason other than then there was other things going on in Star Wars or my own just focus. And so it has become this guilty pleasure of rediscovering a thing that I was like, oh my gosh, I like this much. Why don't I watch this more? Well, now I'm watching it.
Great.
You don't find it super depressing to watch over and over?
No, because it's worth something in the end, right?
Yeah.
It's that all of that sacrifice is ultimately worth this wonderful thing, is ultimately worth this thing, the fact that they win, right?
Yeah.
And knowing that makes a film, makes a story like that, to me, I think actually just all the more rewarding to experience, because I've gotten past that sort of emotion, oh gosh. And then also, it's a really brave thing, the decisions they make about the characters and the fates in that story, which I'm talking about semi-obliquely in case anybody's not watched Rogue One is listening to this. But knowing that and really valuing those are strong creative choices that you made, and the film is all the stronger for that. And I think endures and retains itself as a guilty pleasure for me right now because of the confidence they had to make those decisions.
Love that answer.
I want to say, because I may forget during the interview, but reading Mask of Fear leading up to Andor Season 2, it fit in so perfectly. It fit in as perfectly as like episode 9 of Andor Season 2 going into Rebels. It's just like the tone and feeling of it was fantastic.
Oh, I'm glad I felt that. I was right there with you watching Andor Season. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that worked out. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, it looks like the cover of the Mask of Fear when she's floating to the center thing to give her speech. Like, I was right there with you, feeling that same sort of synchronicity. It was super fun to watch in real time.
I love that. We need to roll a d6. Dave, do you got one?
Got a 2.
A 2. Okay, who's your favorite minor character?
Let me tell you, when I was looking over the option, I was like, I hope they roll a 2. Not because I don't have answers to it, but like, let's say, my favorite minor character is Quarry. Is Quarry the shipbuilder and the shipsmith that we meet in Star Wars Rebels, who is the architect and the designer of the B-Wing? The like Mon Calamar, like mechanic inventor. I love Quarry. He's just like so great. He is that perfect mix of like, I cannot be bothered by anybody. I am deeply passionate and obsessed with this thing. And despite my gruff exterior, when I meet someone like Hera, for whom they are sort of like a kind of like ship-loving soulmates, like they both love flying and they love ships in different ways. She's a pilot, he's a mechanic, but like they then just sync up so well. And I love that episode of Rebels, and I love that character Quarry, and I just like to imagine him like in the background of every future scene in like anywhere in Star Wars, just like tinkering away on the ships and just being so happy about like, you know, building crazy gimbaling starships like the B-Wing. Like, just love Quarry.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I don't think we've had that answer yet. That's really fun. I love the light that question shines on all of the very, like, I don't know, the characters that make up the Star Wars universe but don't always get, like, the most love.
The characters who show up for, like, 2 minutes. You know, I mean, Quarry shows up for basically one episode of a show that had, you know, dozens of episodes. I think maybe he shows up kind of in one other episode for, like, 2 minutes or something, or is at least mentioned. It's kind of why I dug you rolling it too, because I'm like, oh, we get to talk about something like a little more on the periphery.
Yes.
What is your favorite line to quote?
Oh, that changes a lot, but I think one, and it's a little bit in the same vein as like a minor character, like a line that I love to quote that is not a line that I think people quote a lot, is actually interesting enough, or coincidentally enough, also from Rebels. It is the line that Yoda says to Ezra Bridger when he first meets him, when Ezra's in the Lothal Temple, and it's the episode that involves Ezra eventually finding the Kyber crystal where he builds his lightsaber. And when he first meets Yoda through a sort of force vision or through the force, or, you know, it's I think intentionally a little murky exactly what's going on there. Ezra's like, who are you? Or like, what are you doing here? And Yoda says to him, know that I am here because you are here, which to me is a line that I'd love to quote and think about, because I think it's one of the more beautiful lines about like togetherness, and is this like kind of perfect Jedi sort of thing of like, I'm here because you're here, because we shouldn't be alone, and because we are all better off when we are not alone and we're together. So like, as long as you know that I'm here because of you, or because you're here because you need someone else here, you need this other thing, like that's the only thing that matters. I think there's like a really wonderful sort of beautiful sentiment that is sort of only expressed in that one moment. And it's this really wonderful, small little Jedi lesson that I think Yoda imparts to Ezra that I like. It's a great little line.
I feel like that's so telling, because, and we'll get more into this as we go along, but you as an editor, you're someone there for the authors, and you're there because they are there. And I find that just so kind of poetic that you, in what you do, zeroed in on that line.
Well, that's very kind of you. I like to hope that, and I like to think that is the relationship that I foster with my writers.
I would say it probably is. Besides the movies, what is your favorite Star Wars content?
I mean, it's books. You know, my favorite Star Wars is books. As a very cool pin that I've seen on the internet that someone made that I really wish I had come up with the idea for. And it's the part of Star Wars that made me want to work on storytelling. If Star Wars is one of the things that made me fall in, and the movies made me one of the things that made me just fall in love with storytelling as a kid, Star Wars books is the thing that made me fall in love with the idea of being a participant in storytelling, Star Wars or otherwise. And so it's absolutely the books, and not just because I get to work on them.
Well, okay, and that leads us perfectly into the last of Five with the Force.
Yeah.
Then, what Star Wars novel do you feel is like most underrated by the fandom?
Oh gosh. Oh, there's so many. I'm gonna gosh. It's so hard. Okay.
Oh
I'm
no!
like, there's two. Well, I'm like, I have to pick one, right? It was like I just got to pick one for right now. There's two in my mind. I'm gonna pick, because we were just talking about Rogue One, because it's the sort of era of Andor. I'm gonna pick a book that is a little bit older. It's now 10 years old this year. It's called Star Wars Battlefront Twilight. And it has like, it's very funny. This book has like so many weird sort of connections back to like what is going on right presently in Star Wars. So first of all, it is written by Alexander Freed, who also just wrote The Mask of Fear, who also wrote the novelization of Rogue One. And it is written, first off, in the same sort of very close to the ground, much more about like the quote unquote ordinary people involved with the rebellion rather than the sort of galactic superheroes, in the way that Andor is very much about a lot of the normal people, some of who become big, epic sort of mythic heroes. But it's not really about them as those. It's about them as normal people. It takes place during the Galactic Civil War. It has overlaps like the Battle of Hoth. It is connected to the Battlefront video games in a broad sense in terms of the locations. It to me is like a lot of the kinds of themes and ideas and forms of storytelling that right now a lot of people are really jazzed about with Andor, Mask of Fear. I'm like, oh, there's a story that was written 10 years ago that fits right into that. It's Twilight Company. And I so enjoy those characters. We're all original characters, but there are also in that story some really unbelievably beautiful and wonderful moments where those characters literally cross paths with Han Solo, where they show up in Echo Base during the Battle of Hoth. One of the main characters has this amazing conversation with Han Solo in Echo Base. And one of the things I love about that scene in particular, and Alex Freed's approach to writing, is he actually writes that scene where we never identify who the person is talking to. So you are with the Twilight Company character, never identify that he's talking to Han Solo. But of course, because Han Solo is Han Solo, if you hear him talking, you know who he's talking to, right? You know who that is. You don't need the name identified. And it's just such a great story. And it's one of those awesome, like kind of standalone things. And it's now 10 years old. I feel like that's one of those books that I think has gone underrated and underappreciated, and is one of those things that hopefully people go back to. And if you've just read The Mask of Fear and you've really enjoyed that, you're like, what else could I read by Alexander Freed? I recommend any of his books. Go check out Twilight Company. I actually think you'll dig it.
Okay.
I think you'll dig it quite a bit.
Nice.
For those who don't see our video, I literally just held up Alexander Freed's book because it was sitting on my desk.
Thank you very much. It's sitting to my left right now, as well as behind me, but also
it was on my left as well. That's funny. Awesome. Well, that's our 5 with the 4s. Dave, do you want to kick us off from a certain point of view?
Yes. What was your first introduction to Star Wars, and can you take us through that experience?
Sure. This is always a stressful question for me because, unlike so many people, whether I'm listening to this podcast or other interviews who have these like amazingly eloquent stories that they can tell you about the memories of being introduced to Star Wars, I can't remember. I don't know. Yes. So I always like rack my brain really trying to figure out like, when's the first time I saw it? Which family member or friend or like who in the world introduced me to it, etc. And I don't know, which kind of means that I get to have fun and just be like, well, Star Wars just always been a part of me. I just was born knowing about Star Wars.
There's a lot of people who say that too. It's just like they just grew up and Star Wars was a part of their existence. Yeah,
exactly. It's like gravity. Now I'm a child of the late 80s, so that is when I was born. So I was growing up during the 90s. So in terms of my actual real introduction and walking through it, having the films on VHS was very much a thing, though. We moved when I was a little bit young, and during the move, we lost the VHSs for The Empire Strikes Back and A New Hope. They just got lost in the way that you lose like socks. So I don't know where they went. And because it was like the early 90s, like, yes, you could have gone out and like bought another one or whatever, but that's just like wasn't really a thing you thought about doing as much, especially when you're like an 8-year-old kid and all you just have money. So the Return of the Jedi was really like a fundamental part of my core early Star Wars experience because it was the only Star Wars thing I could watch. So we just watched Return of the Jedi. We watched Return of the Jedi like way more than the other movies, unless they were on TV for, one reason or another.
It's a great one.
Yeah.
It's great. So I've always had an extra affinity of Return of the Jedi just for the reps that I got hanging out with the Ewoks.
Yeah.
But then obviously, like the first real, if not my introduction, my real turning point in Star Wars was getting to go see the special editions when they were re-released in theaters, because I know that those were the first times I ever saw Star Wars on a big screen. And I can remember going with my friends and my family and relatives, like each month that those movies came out, like going back to the theater each month to go see all three of them in theaters. And that was a big thing. And then from there, it really then became about all the other experiences, particularly the books, and finding out there were books and then slowly devouring all of them, from the time that I was young all the way up until now, when I'm, still reading.
Do you remember what your first book was?
I do. I do. So my first Star Wars book, which is probably not most people's first Star Wars book. So my first Star Wars book was the novel I, Jedi by Michael Stackpole. And the reason being that I remember being in a store, because my grandfather used to like take us out to the bookstore a lot. It'd be like, hey, you got anybody, you could buy any book you want, right? Kind of thing. We'd all run around the store for a bit and then come back. And I remember ending up in the science fiction fantasy section. I remember seeing like, oh my gosh, Star Wars. Oh my God, wait, there's Star Wars. And this is how I discovered it, because it's the like mid to 90s. I'm a young kid, and there's not internets and Twitters and Discords, and like there are not communities and ways for me to like go out and be like, oh gosh, someone tells me there's Star Wars books and tells me which one should you read first, and here's the order and all that. No idea. So I'm looking at this shelf, and at that time there weren't that many Star Wars books, but there's enough to fill up a shelf and a half or a little bit of a shelf. And I was just like looking at all of them and looking at the spines. And I see this one that says I, Jedi, which as a title is so different from every other Star Wars book title. Not just at the time, but kind of ever. Most other Star Wars books are like Star Wars, Heir to the Empire, Star Wars, True Set, blah, blah, blah. The battle, it's like
Shadow of the Sith.
And they, they're all different, but they kind of fit this cadence. I, Jedi stuck out so much that I picked it up off the shelf. I remember looking at the front of it and not recognizing the character, not recognizing it's Corran Horn, but just being like, wait, that guy, he's a Jedi. That's a lightsaber. But first of all, that lightsaber is a color I've never seen before. I've never seen a Jedi before. I read the back cover and I go like, wait a minute. This is a Star Wars story about a Jedi and it's not Luke Skywalker, and it's not Obi-Wan Kenobi. And so I just decided to buy it and read that. Now, people who know a lot about the Legends novels and where a Jedi fits, it's sort of like I am going to be making a broad generalization here, sort of simplifying, but it's a little bit of an offshoot story of a different trilogy. So I read it. I was not lost. I sort of fully understood like, oh, there's other adventures going on here. Maybe that happened in a different book and I haven't read that one yet. But I read it and then it's like in first person. And I was just like so sort of swept up in that experience of reading a Star Wars story that wasn't about, wasn't corely about Luke Skywalker or Han Solo or Princess Leia, that I was just like fully drawn into this idea that there was Star Wars beyond the movies, right? And Star Wars beyond the movies, beyond just those characters, which I love. So that was my first Star Wars.
Oh.
Wow, that's quite the book to jump in on.
It is. And look, I totally recommend it to people. It's maybe not the optimum reading experience, depending on what your definition of optimum is. But hey, totally recommend it. Worked for me.
I want to ask you real quick, too, because you saw the movies for the first time in theaters with a special release. You grew up, you were born in late 80s, grew up as a 90s child, which makes you close to the perfect age for Phantom Menace. When you went into Phantom Menace, was there kind of a delineation between, oh, this is something completely new to the special releases we just saw? Or was it more of something like, this is still part of my Star Wars growing journey?
For me, Star Wars has always been a singular straight line that's uninterrupted. So to me, the Phantom Menace and the prequels were just like, it's the next part in my Star Wars journey. And I'd never differentiate in the way of like, oh, well, it's like the original trilogy is like Star Wars that I first was introduced to. And now this, like, I'm a little older and this is coming up. So this is a different Star Wars or not for me or not a thing that I can or should experience. So I always experienced it. I've always experienced Star Wars as like a singular linear experience, whether the thing that I experienced I ended up really loving or not liking as much or somewhere in between or whatever. But it was never a completely different thing to me. Now, I wasn't as tapped into like when the special editions came out, like, oh, the whispers like, oh, there's going to be new movies and stuff like that. Because I was still more or less a kid. So it was more just like, oh, there's a new Star Wars, right? I was aware that there had not been a new Star Wars for quite a long time because I had relatives who like would tell me stories about going to see Star Wars in the 70s, right? And so I was aware, and the 80s. So I was aware of the fact that like the Phantom Menace like was this massive deal because there hadn't been a new Star Wars, since 1983.
It's before the Dark
Otherwise, but otherwise didn't really differentiate.
Yeah.
Also, I was reading a ton of books. So I was like, oh, there's plenty of Star Wars for me. I'm reading books. Also, there's video games. To me, the idea of there not being Star Wars was just that was not part of my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you say your fandom of Star Wars shaped your perspective on storytelling and your creativity and kind of set you on the path that you ultimately ended up on?
Star Wars is like one of many storytelling worlds or storytelling traditions that I think made me deeply want to eventually work on storytelling and be a contributor in a creative sense to genre storytelling, specifically science fiction and fantasy, superheroes, those sorts of genres. Because Star Wars, like a bunch of other things, sort of informed then a lot of what I read. Not just Star Wars, but like I sought out other science fiction because of Star Wars, right? I sought out other fantasy because of Lord of the Rings, for instance. And so it really informed this deep love that I had of genre, and was always one of the examples that I would point to around one of the things that I would love so much about genre. I think Star Wars is emblematic of this, is the ability for genre, for science fiction, for fantasy, to actually be not a type of storytelling, but it merely a space in which all kinds of storytelling can occur, but with like a different tinge. So within Star Wars, you can have crime stories, you could have romance, you could have supernatural horror type stories, you could have stories that evoke the kind of boundless journeys and sort of unknowingness of like Western dramas or Western adventure. You can, it's any number of things. And Star Wars was one of the storytelling traditions that I think really gave me that sense of storytelling is flexible and storytelling is malleable and mutable. And any world, despite whatever rules it might have or traditions it might have about how different things work within it, are still spaces where you can tell any kind of story you want, regardless of like what the technological shape is or like, how time works or distance or anything like that. But it was sort of deeply informative. And I knew I never wanted to actually be a writer of any kind or anything like, because I knew I never had the talent for that. But I knew that I wanted to try to find other ways to contribute to that kind of storytelling. And once I settled myself on specifically wanting to work like in publishing and being an editor and working on books, I set myself on, okay, I don't just want to go work and be an editor on fiction. I don't want to just go and be an editor on science fiction fantasy. I want to go work on Star Wars books. I sat in someone's office about 12 years ago and told them, as I was starting to embark upon this really crazy idea of I'm going to go work in publishing, when they said, what are you going to go do? I said, I'm going to go edit Star Wars books. I literally said that. I said, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go edit Star Wars books. I'm going to go figure out how to do that. And I'm going to go do that because somebody does it and I read them and I really like it. I'm going to go work on those books and other kinds of books.
I love that. What a boss move.
Yes.
Oh, to be really young and impulsive. And really, there's no downside to calling a shot that way.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
No, clearly it worked.
Yeah.
That's so rad.
That's really rad.
Can you walk our listeners through kind of your day-to-day? Like, what is your role as an editor? How do you affect the story? Like, what's your role in developing and bringing our favorite books to life?
Sure.
Yeah, because really to me, this is an editor. Because I have no idea really what an editor does. An editor is like, you need a comma there and you shouldn't use an ampersand there.
Okay.
So I'm absolutely fascinated to find out.
Okay. So what you have described is a type of edit. So there are types of editing, which means there are types of editors, and we'll get into what kind of editor I am in a second. But there are sort of layers to editing, and there are layers to editing. There are types of editors, and then there's sort of, for the type of editor that I am, there are two sides. Now, it sounds very complicated and weird, but I promise it'll make sense.
Yeah.
So I am actually editorial director at Random House Worlds, the editorial director of fiction and special projects. Please don't ask me what the special projects are. I don't really know. It's just a cool part of my title. I think all my projects are special, so all of them. And I work on a number of different things. Star Wars is a big piece of what I do, but it's not the whole thing that I do. And as editor on Star Wars, but this is true of all the books that I work on, I am what you would call a acquisitions, developmental, and line editor. So there's broadly, and I am, again, sort of generalizing a little bit about publishing. So anyone who's listening to this is broadly true, but please don't take it as, like etched in Duracrete or anything like that. They're kind of like, we could separate editors into kind of like four buckets. Acquisitions editors, those are editors whose part of their responsibility is to like actually bring projects into a publishing house. So maybe you're buying manuscripts from authors who are submitting them, or in my case, you're working with partners like Star Wars, or I work with DC on Batman stuff, a bunch of others to put together story ideas to then bring in people to write. That's acquisition sides. You're bringing the stories inside the publishing house to eventually make. The next big bucket is called developmental editors. Developmental editors, of which I am also, are the people who will sit down with an author and really talk about owning and developing the story from the big ideas standpoint. Like, what story are we telling? Okay, we're going to tell the story about how the rebels stole the Death Star. And okay, we need some characters for this and this. Okay, what's kind of our character journeys? What are our large themes here? What kind of how do we want this to tell the story? What sort of maybe genre conventions does it fit into? We're going to play off of what's the overall plot? What's the overall tension? Those kinds of things. That's developmental editing because we're talking about the giant big ideas of what the story's going to be. So I also do that. The next kind of editor is called a line editor. And I also do line editing. So the other thing too is many editors are not necessarily just one thing. There's a lot of overlap or people do, but it's the easiest way to explain them as sort of discrete. So a line editor is someone who's going to take the strategic vision that's been developed during the developmental editing process. And line editing is about looking at the actual text itself and saying like, well, how does this line of dialogue help us support the kind of character we know this person's supposed to be? And is this line of dialogue delivering that effectively? Whether it's a line of dialogue, a paragraph of descriptive text to set up a scene, the blocking in an action scene, the arc of a character journey over certain chapters. Line editing is really down to the nitty gritty, like cross out this line. Hey, what if we use this word instead of this word? Or, hey, this doesn't quite make sense or whatever. That's line. And then the last piece is sort of copy editing and proofreading, which I do some of that, but I am definitionally not a copy editor proofreader. That's actually different roles and different jobs, which is great because that's not totally my strength. I work with a wonderful group of copy editors, an absolutely wonderful group. If you've ever read any book that I've worked on, any Star Wars book in the last 10 years, and you're like, wow, the writing in this is really great. I promise you, it is way more due to the copy editing team and our wonderful authors than it is anything that I am doing. But really brilliant stuff. And copy editing and proofreading is down to not just fixing errors like, oh, you don't have a space here or this word is spelled wrong, but grammar and style, and like the actual way in which sentences cohere to each other or the arrangement of text or sort of the clarity broadly of the text. Yeah. And so those are the types of editors. So like I said, I'm sort of the first three all grouped into one. And so my job is really to work with authors, to work with the teams that want to make books, whether it's Star Wars, my friends at Lucasfilm, whether it's my friends at DC or any of the other teams that I work with, to help decide, okay, what kind of story do we want to tell? Oh, we want to tell, let's use the Mask of Fear example. Oh, it'd be great because Andor is doing this kind of storytelling here. And there's these kinds of ideas in Bad Batch and these kinds of ideas in the Jedi Survivor series, all about the early years of the Empire and everything that happens before the rebellions. Okay, but what if we looked at the very first year after that? What if we asked the question of like, okay, the Empire gets established on a Thursday. Well, what happens on Monday morning, right? Like we know what happens 20 years later. We know what happens today. What happens on like Monday? Like what happens 3 days later? And so we come up with that sort of idea and the sort of broad concept. And then my job as an editor is to work to help figure out who might be the best authors to take on that task, who might be the most interested, what authors and their skill sets or their experience might speak to that kind of story, and thus essentially put them in the best position to tell the best possible story. Because really, when you're an editor, that's your job, is to put your writer in the best position possible to tell the best version of their story. So we do that, and once we bring the writer on board, I am there every step of the way, helping them to develop their outline and giving them feedback, then helping them through every iteration of their manuscript, every draft we go through, starting with tend to be more developmental, larger scale changes and ideas. And as you go and a book becomes more fully formed and you become more, set, the kinds of edits you're doing will kind of get smaller and more focused, right? You start to dial in some of those line edits or dial in those lines of dialogue. And so that as an editor is my role, to just help shepherd the author through their entire process, to be their sounding board for ideas, to kind of be their first core reader and being like, well, as a reader, this is what someone might think coming out of this chapter. Is that what you intend? Because if it is, great. If not, okay, we might have to go in and make some changes to increase clarity or whatever. And that's kind of what an editor does in terms of working on a book. And they do that all the way through, right until a book is done and basically ready to be printed and go on your shelf, right down to that last time that I read a book, even though it's like the 9th or 10th time maybe I've read this story, and I'm still looking for proofreading errors. I'm still looking for typos. I'm still looking for like anything we can just like tweak just that last little bit to make better. That's what an editor does in a very long answer. But
no, I appreciate it.
But like I said, that's actually only half of what it is. So the other half of what we do, which will not take me nearly as long to explain, is the other half of my role is actually within the publishing house. I am the project manager for shepherding that book through the bookmaking process, through the process of going from being a Word document file on Alexander Freed's computer, the Mask of Fear, all the way through being a book that you can hold up on the Zoom, to show it. And it's my job to shepherd it through the publishing house, to connect it with all the other departments outside of the editorial department, like the production department, the art and design departments, marketing and publicity, who all have a hand in helping to make the book real. And my job as editor is to like keep all the trains running on time, be aware of all the deadlines, get all of those departments the information or material they need to contribute their part of the process. So that's like the other half of my job. That has nothing to do with like whether or not, a word is capitalized correctly, or like the character arc is working, or like, does this piece of technology actually exist in Star Wars? Or it has nothing to do with any of those questions.
You guys are like the unsung heroes that make these things happen. Like, I can imagine, based off what I know of book writing already and the process you've laid out here, it sounds like such a potentially isolating and just terrifying endeavor for an author in a lot of respects, especially when you're like inserting a story into an already existing, just massive universe. And so it sounds like it's kind of your job to just keep them out of their own head, get them out of their own way, help them like find the what's inside. I don't know, like
Well, you're kind of like in that is it curling on the ice where someone brooms just before the curling ball or whatever that's called, the curling puck, I don't know, but you're kind of like the guy with the broom, just making sure it has the momentum to keep going to the finish line.
Yes, that's actually like a pretty good analogy. The role of an editor in relation to the author, to their authors, is like, at one point you are like their creative feedback on just storytelling, on clear writing, on all that stuff, right? At the same time, you are a kind of, not to diminish or kind of overly simplify this very important thing, like you can at times be a sort of therapist / sounding board for their anxiety and stress as it relates to this project. Like, I am the person that if one of my authors is freaking out about like, I have writer's block, or I can't crack this thing, or I'm feeling the pressure around this, or I got my edits back and like I get them and I understand them and they make sense, but I don't know yet how to solve them. Like, I am the person that I'm like, yeah, give me a call. Let's talk about it. We'll figure it out.
It's a lot of pressure.
It is. You're providing sort of writing support, storytelling support, emotional support. It is a deep partnership at being an editor and an author's relation. It's a deep partnership that you end up spending quite a bit of time talking to each other and develop, at least in the best relationships, develop a kind of intimacy on par with like the people that you know in your life as friends and family, because you're working on storytelling together, which means that you're probably sharing parts of yourself about like how you see the world or your own experiences, because that is what informs storytelling. And so then you develop this sense of trust and being able to trust each other to have challenging conversations or vulnerable conversations or difficult conversations around storytelling, around characters, around decisions, around like all sorts of things. And it requires as much people management or sort of empathy as a skill as it does like your ability to identify good writing, or your ability to communicate about how good or how poor a piece of writing is. In fact, the part of being able to be empathetic and help relate to someone is probably a more valuable skill as an editor than anything else. But it's super fun. And it also means I get to work with tons of really cool people.
It sounds like no day is the same too, which is like, honestly, I feel like what most people strive for in their job is that variety, and that you don't really know what the next day is going to bring.
You're right, because we've been talking about this in the context of like making a book. As an editor, no editor is ever just working on one book. Like, I have books at every stage, and so no day is the same, because day to day, and even within a day, I might be jumping from reading a manuscript to reviewing an outline to calling up an author and making them an offer on a book to confirming the final files on a book that's about to go to the printer. And that might all happen the same day or the same 48 hours.
Wow.
All the
That's
time.
crazy.
Because you have all those different trains, different stations. They all got to run on time, right? And that's a big piece of it too, is working on a lot of different books all at the same time.
How many books would you say you read a month?
Not as many as you'd think.
Okay.
Because if it's a busy month where I'm like actively working on editing some books, I'm not doing a whole lot of other reading. So like in my personal life, I won't be reading like anything, because the last thing I want to do at the end of a long day is read, right? I'll usually go play a board game or play video games or watch something, because it's just storytelling in a much different way, which means I can kind of turn the working part of my brain off. And so if I'm actively editing a book in a given month or a given amount of time, I might just be reading and working on that book or that book and another book. And so it's like I'm only reading 2 books. I might be reading them a bunch of times, but I'm only reading. Periods where I'm not so busy, I will probably read at least part of 4 or 5 books. And when I say part, that's usually because I'm often reading, 1, to check out books that I've heard about that are exciting. 2, to just try to stay current on like what kinds of things people are interested in, what sort of trends are there in publishing, genre and publishing or otherwise. 3, I'm doing author research, saying like, oh, would I be interested in maybe working with a particular author in the future for one of the storytelling worlds that I work in, or any number of other reasons. And so I will oftentimes not actually finish a whole book. I will just because I might not have a lot of time. So I will sort of dip in and out. But there are definitely months got by when someone's like, hey, what have you been reading? And my answer is nothing. Because I'm just working on editing this one book, which to me kind of doesn't count.
I'm curious some of the maybe more unique challenges that you might have working on the Star Wars property, it being such a like eagle-eyed fan base and so passionate for so many people. What maybe comes along with that maybe other editors don't have to contend with?
So the wonderful thing about working on Star Wars or any of the other sort of licensed storytelling traditions, creative spaces that I get to be a very minor, off to the side custodian of a very small part of that sandbox, which is lovely, is the amount of attention sort of just means that like there's no such thing as a throwaway line. Or if you're going to have a throwaway line, you have to know that somewhere somebody is not going to consider that a throwaway line in the way that a non, an original story or just like a one-off story from an author that's not in an established world or like a living IP growing world will. But it just, to be honest, you also have to not let yourself be paralyzed by that kind of stuff, because ultimately you have a plan to tell a story. You, as an editor, are working with an author, working with a bunch of other people. There's like a collective team that have all decided, we want to tell this story. We want to tell a story for XYZ reasons with XYZ goals. And you sort of have to just, at every step of the way, constantly reinforce, are the decisions we're making about telling that story for those reasons. And at the end of it, hopefully people will like it, right? And ideally, people will. And you think they will. And I very much appreciate the level of attention and detail that people take into digging into like the novels and digging into like, oh, on the cover of this book, this person's sleeve is here. And so that means that. And a lot of times it's like, no, that's not what that means. That's just the way the art came out, or that's just the way that sentence was built. Or like the funny thing that'll happen where like you'll agonize with an author over like a particular 2 sentences. You just agonize forever and ever and ever. And then when you read or you see reception to the book, it's like no one ever mentions those 2 sentences. But this thing that neither of you ever considered or neither of you ever thought was going to be interesting or was important, it was very much the definition of like a throwaway line, is suddenly like the most important thing ever. And it's one of those things that you try not to let it be paralyzing when you're actually doing the work. Because if you do, it's like it would become so much pressure that you just couldn't do. And that, to go back to what we were talking about with like trying to be a sounding board for an author when they're feeling pressure or feeling anxiety, we have conversations about those kinds of things. And I always tell them, I was like, one of the things I always tell any author, no matter what story I'm working on, what book, what world, I always say like, I didn't reach out to you. I didn't hire you. I didn't bring you on to tell like a Batman story, a Star Wars story, a Warcraft story. I brought you on to tell your Star Wars or your Batman story or your, like, the version of that kind of story that only you could tell because you are a unique person. All people are, it's like only you could tell that story. And we try to use that sort of mantra, that idea, to not be paralyzed by that kind of pressure, but to then sort of embrace the beauty of, like, once a book is out in the world, seeing the way in which, like, readers who have such passion and such an interest and such a depth of knowledge about these worlds recontextualize or reinterpret these stories in ways that neither the author nor me or anyone else involved in the story could, like, ever have imagined it. And it's this kind of wonderful, beautiful thing that happens. But you try not to feel pressure about it. And I think it's definitely something that, as I've had more time working on books as an editor, it's one of those things that, like, with age and with experience, that I think you do get better at. Because I used to feel so much pressure when I was a younger editor about every comma and every ampersand. And you try to let that go a little bit. Let that go a little bit, so that you could actually focus on telling a good story. Because sometimes that pressure and anxiety will actually, like, you'll tell a worse story because you'll just be, like, so worried about making any decision or any choice or, committing to something. You'll be trying to make a story for everyone, which every story is ideally for everyone. But, like, it's one of those things where a lot of times if you try to create a story for everyone, you end up making a story for nobody, right? Because every choice you make, you try to undo the choice somewhere else to balance it out in a weird way. So just try not to, like, again, try not to get paralyzed by that, right? Or try not to get too anxious about it, but honestly, just embrace the fact that someone cares that deeply about the kinds of stories you're contributing to, which is honestly a rare thing. It's really a rare thing.
Yeah.
I love the way you said you look to the author and tell them, I want you to tell your story, your version of the Star Wars story.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to go back to your first book that you ever read, I, Jedi, which was so far out of the box for Star Wars stories even back then, that I feel like that carried over to your work, that you were like, I can see outside of the Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia box into a bigger sandbox. And having the courage just to go after that, I think, is incredible.
Oh, well, thank you. I never thought of it that way, but thank you.
What was a Star Wars book you just had a lot of fun being the editor for? And can you take us through that and explain what it was about that experience you so enjoyed?
There's such an... I actually want to say that I deeply appreciate that question. And I'll answer in a second. But I tell you why I deeply appreciate it is I often get asked the question, what's your favorite book? And that's a question I cannot answer, because it's almost like asking me to choose a favorite child.
Sure.
But not in the sense of the books, but because of what I was talking about before, of, like, when someone asks me, well, what's your favorite book I work on? Well, when I think of any book I've ever worked on, the first thing I think about is the author who I worked on, right? So asking me to pick a favorite book is like asking me, like, pick a favorite person.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you asked it as, like, a book that was just immensely fun. And luckily for me, I've immensely privileged that the majority, like, every book that I've worked on has been fun in some way, shape, or form, gratifying, satisfying, or enriching. But a project that always stands out for me as being a ridiculous amount of fun is the From a Certain Point of View trilogy of anthology short stories that we made. For folks who may not be familiar, we created a series called Star Wars From a Certain Point of View. 40 stories, 40 years, 40 authors. These were anthology books that we made for the 40th anniversaries of each of the original trilogy films for their anniversary year. And what we did was we had 40 authors each write a short story. So 40 short stories, which retold the entire story of A New Hope or Empire, Strikes Back, or Return of the Jedi, but entirely from the point of view of characters who were not the main characters. So there are no Luke Skywalker stories. He might appear in a story, but it's not his POV. There's no Luke, Leia, Han, Vader. It's all the side characters. It's all the other characters who exist in Star Wars who we know were around then, but we never saw in the movie, like, Lando Calrissian during A New Hope. And it was so much fun because we just got to set authors loose on coming up with unbelievably brilliant and creative and frankly wild short stories that ran the gamut, not just of genre, but of writing styles, point of view, stories that are unbelievably hilarious, unbelievably touching, unbelievably emotional, scary, the entire thing, and doing it in short form storytelling, which just gives you a kind of flexibility and malleability that at times long form storytelling doesn't. There are some kind of stories that you might come up with an idea for a story and you realize, that story doesn't have legs for 80,000 or 100,000 words for a full novel, but it does have legs for like 3,000 words, right? It is a short story. And so getting to do that, not just once, not just twice, 3 times was, I often refer to it as the best bad idea we've ever had, because it was just such a bad idea, because making them was like making a novel, but making 40 of them at the same time. Because even though they were short fiction, we were putting all the same rigor and effort and intent into each of those short stories as we do one of our novels. So
that's like 40 therapy sessions a day.
Absolutely wild. It's absolutely wild. The very first time we ever came up with this idea, it was like somebody made a joke. Somebody was like, "Oh," because we were talking about like, how do we celebrate the 40th anniversary? And is there a way we could do something with retelling A New Hope in some way, or recontextualizing that? It seems like a good thing to do for an anniversary like the 40th, right? Because something's been around for a while. So many generations of people have grown up with it. It means so many different things. Great. Yes. And we were like, could we get someone to rewrite the whole film from a different perspective or some other way? And then somebody joked in a meeting, what if we did 40 stories because it's 40 years and we got 40 authors? And everybody laughed, because that's a ridiculous thing. You should not do that. It's a bad idea. And we all laughed. And then the laughter died down. We all kind of looked at each other. And then we were all like, darn it. It's a good idea. It means we have to do it now. And we're not allowed to say no just because it's hard. Even though it's going to be hard, we're not allowed to say no. But it was so much fun, because everything that I love about making one novel, as hard as it is making one novel, as challenging as that was to then kind of do it times 40, all the things that are so wonderful and that I love so much about like one story, I got to do 40 times, all at once, with all these different authors, people I have like honestly, writers who I grew up idolizing, who I'm like, do you want to come write a Star Wars story with me? And we're like, absolutely. And then I'm suddenly sitting around and helping to edit, a story that this person who's like writing, I have idolized forever, and who I never would imagine would come and write like a short story with me. And to get to do that 3 times, to get to introduce so many new people to the Star Wars community as authors, like so many authors who'd never written anything for Star Wars. All of this together just made it a kind of fun that is kind of almost unmatched by anything else. And it was ridiculous. And every time I think about it, I still am tired. But also just like, I cannot talk about it without a big smile on my face, because of how much ridiculous fun it was to do that many times. And to be so surprised by someone sending in an outline of like, I want to tell a story from the perspective of the cave on Dagobah.
Yes.
Wait, say that again. You want to write a story from the cave's perspective, not someone going into the physical, the rocks. Yes. How are you going to do that? Well, all right, I got to see it. Go for it. And then Tracy Dion writing this just incredible treatise on the nature of, on the cave. Or, Catherine Valente being like, well, I really dug the space slug in The Empire Strikes Back. Can I write a story from the perspective of the space slug? What? Well, it's like this big thing about like grief and love across like a millennia of time. You're just like, what is and that would happen so many times with all these different kinds of pitches and kernels of ideas that we'd get in. And they were so wild and so crazy. And every author was constantly seeing what other authors were doing. And so they were just like, well, I got to swing. That person swung for the fences, so I got to swing for the next fence. Like to just try to go bigger and bigger and more grand and more, ostentatious, but also then still make it a Star Wars story.
Yeah.
And to have that happen time and again and be so delightfully surprised at every twist and turn by those stories was just the best. Just the best. Loved it. So much fun.
It comes across in final products. There's some of my favorites to just like flip over, open, and just read a random story from, like, because they're just so, some of them are so out of the box, wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. And as I said, to be honest, like many of those stories are great stories, but like if you try to imagine, well, what's the novel-like version of the story? There kind of isn't one. And so that format provided this lovely gift of expanding the kinds of stories we could tell into these stories that otherwise wouldn't really fit, right? They only sort of fit in this one kind of format. So that definitely among the most fun.
I always thought the reason behind these point of view stories was the idea of Star Wars is just filled with characters who are on the screen for 2 seconds, and yet, like Tales from Mos Eisley, Tales from the Cantina, you build a story out around them. And I just felt like naturally telling the story of Star Wars from the other character's perspective was just the way to go.
You're actually pretty right about that is one of the core ideas that informed how we viewed it, and something we would tell authors when we brought them on board to really try to get them in the mindset is we'd say, one of the great things about Star Wars is no matter how many times you watch it, when you sit down and watch one of the movies, you kind of will notice something you never noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times that thing you'll notice on the 6th, the 8th, the 20th, the, however many, the limit does not exist viewing of a movie is you just notice something very much on the periphery, right? Like, wait a minute, why is that guy carrying, is that like an ice cream maker? Like, why is he doing that? Like, what's going on there? Like, running across the screen. Like, what is that person doing over there? Like, what's happening here? And at least my experience, and so many of the people I work with, our collective experiences is like when we sit around with people to watch Star Wars and that happens, we don't stop watching the movie, but we almost start talking about and making up like, well, what the heck is going on with that person?
Yeah.
And we wanted to bring that sense of that idea into book form, into story form, which is right in line with what you said, and then connect it with the idea that because Star Wars was 40 years old at the time, and so many generations of creative storytelling people, whether they're working books, comics, making movies, music, whatever, are so inspired by Star Wars, that marrying that sense of what is the small side thing about Star Wars that interests you with what does, to borrow the podcast name, what does Star Wars mean to you? And to marry those two things into this tapestry of stories that I think helps get at that thing that is Star Wars' legacy, which is really what you're celebrating when you're celebrating an anniversary.
Yes.
You're celebrating the legacy of something. And this was the way that we could bring those things onto the page in a tangible way and an entertaining.
Are you concerned you only have 14 years to bring together the Phantom Menace?
I'm not concerned about that because I deeply love the job and the career that I have, and I deeply value and love the real privilege that I have been given as a minor and temporary custodian of Star Wars storytelling in books.
Yeah.
But I also hope that in 14 years, that maybe is someone else's problem. Or at least that I am not necessarily...
You're the boss of the person who has to... editorial director of it.
Maybe I get to assign that to somebody else if that's the project that we decide to do then, or maybe I'm off doing something else and I just get to enjoy those stories. So yeah, I try to work far in advance, but 14 years is a little too far. I'm not yet worried about that stuff.
I do take offense to the fact you just reminded me it's only 14 years, but we'll talk about that later offline.
Listen, there's plenty of people who have been counting down for me. They're like, only 19 years. And I'm like, okay, we cannot be doing this. We cannot be doing this.
I feel like Adam Lance Garcia is calling you every day. Hey, man.
I do have authors who have sent me notes or pulled me aside at a convention, be like, hey, when you guys get to FactPov from a certain point of view, Fandom, I want to write this story. I'm like, what am I supposed to write this on? Like, where am I putting this note for the next 17 years?
Like, your Microsoft OneNote, like you have like an
exactly.
archive.
Yes. I have a reminder, 2038.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to be carrying around all these like Post-it notes for the next 20 years.
Yes.
I would love to talk about Revenge of the Sith because
yes, let's go for it.
It's my favorite novelization. Dave, I'm pretty sure it's one of yours as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's easy to say that it is if you're a fan of Star Wars, you're a fan of Revenge of the Sith novelization.
Yeah. I kind of want to combine two questions because I know for time, but we want to hear from you about working on the deluxe edition that's coming out later this year. We were just looking at it actually on Amazon. It's so pretty. We're very excited. We placed our pre-orders. Oh my God.
So everyone who just did my podcast just explode. This is not the final, but I have this is like a test copy as we test some of the features.
So
pretty. So this is not actually final. I'll actually show you the inside of it. You can see it's just blank pages. This is a test proof of what that will look like.
It's lovely.
It's
Well, okay,
gorgeous.
so we want to hear about working on that, what the most rewarding aspect of that was, and then also as an editor, like your thoughts on why this particular novelization has resonated so much with fans from your perspective.
Sure. So working on this book has been awesome because, as we were talking about, I'm someone who grew up as a kid reading the Star Wars novels. Like I read the novelization for Revenge of the Sith. I read it before the film came out, since it was released a couple weeks before Revenge of the Sith. And I always loved it. I always loved the other books that Matthew Stover, the author, had written, Shatterpoint, etc. And so being able to bring this story to like a brand new edition, and not just bring out a brand new edition for folks like me who have loved it forever, but also for folks who have maybe never read it before at all and maybe don't actually own a copy and want a like beautiful sort of keepsake version for themselves. Being able to do that is like really gratifying. Being able to work with Mr. Stover, with Matthew on the annotations and to talk through that process with him and like dig through all that and work with him on it has been honestly a kind of dream come true project. Like one of those things where you like write down like, I would love to do this. And then you're not sure, like, you don't get to do every project you want to do for one reason or another,
Right.
when with regard to anything. But I had written down like, oh, this would be a cool thing to do if the right circumstances came up. And it did. And so it's super gratifying and getting to essentially ask him all the questions for the annotations that I've just had for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I was like, I've always wanted to wonder, how did you do this? Or where did this come from? Or what inspired this or that? And so I'm just like, well, now I just get to ask him and he's going to tell me. And then, well, why should he just tell me? Why don't we tell everybody? So let's build annotations in the book. And that leads me to the second piece, which is that the legacy of the Revenge of the Sith novelization is, I think the reason why it resonates is a few things. One, I think it does come from that era where movie novelizations would come out before films. And so for many people, for a group of people, their first impression of a film was actually not the film itself, but perhaps its novelization, right? I read the Phantom Menace novelization before I saw the Phantom Menace. So I knew Qui-Gon Jinn died, right? So like, even before you walk into that film, you sort of understand, oh my God, this important moment is going to happen. And so because of that, I think a lot of novelizations, and particularly a novelization like this one, I almost cannot separate my original impressions and my original experience of Revenge of the Sith, the movie, from Revenge of the Sith, the book. And I think that's one. Two, among novelizations, I don't just mean Star Wars novels, I mean all film novelizations ever. Revenge of the Sith is a unicorn. Because of the way that it is written. It is written the overwhelming majority of novelizations. And this is not meant to be bad. This is just how they are written. The overwhelming majority of film novelizations are basically written as taking the script and transposing it as faithfully and kind of directly as possible into prose. And then taking, instead of having visuals in the film, you are translating the visuals into, the sort of blocking prose of scene setting and battle blocking. And there is always and usually content added or perspectives that are changed, or you take advantage of kind of the way in which a book can get into a character's head in a way that film kind of can't in the same way. There's always been that, but there always essentially been some form of straight telling. Revenge of the Sith is not like that. Revenge of the Sith is intentionally taking the story of the film and transposing it and transforming it into a mythic fable in the same vein as like the Greek tragedies. Because at its core, it's like, that's what Star Wars is. And at its core, that's the kind of story that Revenge of the Sith is. And so Matthew Stover decides, I'm actually going to take then this story back to the roots and the form of storytelling Revenge of the Sith would have existed in the kinds of stories that it is so clearly influenced and built upon. And that kind of transformation is just so rare among novelizations. And thus, I think that's one of the reasons why it stands out and endures. And then it just, after you get down from those very big weighty things, it just gets down to the prose is beautiful in a way that just books in general are often not that beautiful. And the kinds of turns of phrase that Matthew found for really grandiose moments, like this is how it feels to be Anakin Skywalker together forever, all the way down to really small moments, like, because the adults are wrong and the kids are right, it's like just really small, beautiful things. And it's just all over that book, right? It's not even just like, oh man, this one scene sticks out. It's every line. It's all over the place. And so that, I think all of that is one of the reasons why it's stayed with the reading community, and particularly the Star Wars reading community, so much, is the way that it helps you to understand or experience the film in a different way, but the way that it is its own solitary experience that no other film novelization, Star Wars or otherwise, really gives you. But the last part of that, because it also informs why we wanted to make this, was I work with a lot of authors who tell me how Revenge of the Sith is like not just their favorite Star Wars book, but like maybe their favorite book ever, or is the most influential book on them in terms of the way that they write, either when they're writing for Star Wars or in their own writing. Like, Mike Chen, who wrote Star Wars Brotherhood, who was a first point of view contributor, has written effusively and spoken effusively around how important the Revenge of the Sith novelization is to him. And other authors like Delilah Dawson have constantly talked to me and talked in interviews about Matthew Stover's writing being a deep influence upon them as writers. And, Adam Christopher in Shadow of the Sith actually has an excerpt from the Revenge of the Sith novelization at the very beginning of the book, that because of how much that story and how much Matthew's writing had influenced them. So the other reason for wanting to do this version, this special anniversary edition, was not just to celebrate it in terms of the reading community, but also just celebrate the impact that this story has had on the people who make Star Wars books. Me, the other authors, like all sorts of people. It's this wonderful chance to celebrate Matthew's work and that story and this whole thing in just a really cool, really awesome way. And that's the sort of why we did it, and I think why this book matters.
You nailed it when you called it a unicorn, and it almost feels like instead of he made a novelization of Revenge of the Sith, what happened was George Lucas made a movie based upon Michael Stover's book, Revenge of the Sith.
Yes, which is not true, but the fact that you feel that experience is one of the successes of the story. But yeah, it's the kind of book that is like, it's just the kind of story that, because it has endured so much, because it has stayed at the center of so many conversations for readers and other creators, that it's just like the way that you celebrate a book that has that kind of legacy and impact is you make a big, beautiful edition. Like you stain the edges, you gild the edges, you do a custom weird acetate see-through jacket thing, which like I didn't even know this existed until my wizard of a design and production team, when we were trying to figure out like, how do we make packaging that gets at the same sort of epic scale as the book and everything? How do we evoke those same things? They were like, oh, we could do this, this, and this. And they like, I was just like, this, I didn't know this was the thing. They were like, oh yeah, we could totally do this. And then they figured
like
out
laying in wait.
The design and production team were just like, they are wizards, like actual Jedi. And so it just made perfect sense. And then that final cherry on top, to ask Mr. Stover to do the annotations for the entire book. And I will share a minor thing with you about that process, which I will probably share more of in the future. But is the first thing he told me was, I've never done an annotated book before. That's fine. I'd never done one either. So we sort of figured it out together. And so he asked me to annotate the book first. He said, what if you went through and just picked out all the parts you want me to provide some commentary on?
Yeah.
So just go there. And so I actually went through and annotated the book first, and would just find a sentence and circle it and be like, tell me about XYZ, or hey, what inspired this, or tell me about what's the reference here, or what do you remember about writing this line, or tell me about like where you were in your life or what was going on, like the first, like this, that, like, and I went through, and I think I might have annotated like every second or third sentence of this book. And there were even moments where I just like would circle a couple of words, and I was just like, I don't have a question here. I just want to hear from you about this. Go.
This was good.
Right. Or just like, Matt, how? Like highlighting, like some incredible line of prose. And then from there, we just built out this kind of amazing thing. And he just told so many wonderful stories that are going to shed all kinds of light on his process, the story, fun behind the scenes tidbits, fun memories about that time. Because it's a cool thing to be able to talk about, like, this is what was going on in Star Wars at the time, or this is what was going on with like the people that I made Star Wars with at the time 20 years ago, and all this stuff. And all these stories that I don't think anyone has ever heard. There's a couple of stories where, like, if you were around when the novel was first published and you went to the bookstore that it was on, maybe you heard him say this in 2006. but there's a lot of stories that I know have never been told. And there's a lot of fun little tidbits and a lot of great little Easter eggs and things. It's just subsumed throughout the whole book. It's not every page has an annotation, but there's over 170 of them. And it's only like a 300 something page book. So, it's
math. Yeah.
yes, exactly.
I love this idea of almost director's commentary within the book. And it's the aspect of the Revenge of the Sith deluxe edition I'm looking forward to the most is getting to see his process, getting to hear those stories. I think we're both just really excited for it. It's going to be a fun addition.
I was so too, because it's like at the end of all this as well, you want, and this is something you think about when you're an editor or you're working on a book, is like you're thinking about audience. And ultimately, every book has an audience, but you always want a book to work for multiple audiences. There may be an audience that you're targeting more directly, or that a kind of story is going to speak more to than others because of the content or whatever. But you also want to make a story and make a book that welcomes as many people in as possible and meets as many of those people where they are as possible. So for this book, it's like, well, for the people who read the book, as I did right when it came out, and probably have owned the book in hardcover and in ebook and in paperback and in audio, like you probably have, but maybe you lost a copy, or you gave a copy away, so you had to buy another one, or something got lost when you moved to college, or, flooded, or, whatever. And
they're with
so
your
much
Empire Strikes Back VHS tape.
They definitely are. And my A New Hope VHS tape. Wanted a version of this book for them. And the annotations, I think, are not just for them, but that's the part that I know is for them, because that's the part really was for me. But then for the people who have never owned a copy of this book, or at least never in hardcover, because this book in hardcover, you could buy it in a used bookstore, or you can find it in any number of used bookstores anywhere. But if you're a place where used bookstores are not a thing or whatever, this book has not actually been available to buy in hardcover since about 2005, 2006. So just giving people that chance, or giving that chance to people who have never read it before, to read it and experience the story the way everyone else did, but then also be able to experience the annotations simultaneously and afterward. And people will actually find when they read the book that we did the annotations as footnotes, specifically for two reasons. One, if it's a footnote instead of like an annotation in the margin, it can be much longer, which means Matthew got to write more text, which means we can tell bigger or more detailed stories, which is great. The second thing it does is that it moves the text of the annotations from the sides of the page, meaning it's competing with the story, to the very bottom, which means if you want to read this book and ignore the footnotes, you can just read the story, and those footnotes do not intrude upon your core experience. And then when you're ready, you can go back and read the footnotes, and your eye line isn't going to be competing with like multiple strings of text in trying to read the story. But there's this call out box just to the left here, and you're distracted. We intentionally did that so that the form of the book would also service the function, depending on if you are a reader who was there reading the book for the first time or the 50th time or somewhere between.
Fantastic.
Spent a lot of time thinking about this.
Yes. Which is good for us.
I hope so.
Going from Revenge of the Sith to something that's coming out next year is one of my favorite. I really enjoyed Mask of Fear, and I'm looking Reign of the Empire. It's Star Wars Reign of the Empire, Mask of Fear. I'm looking forward to part 2. Is there any teaser snippet of info you can share with us about the second book by Rebecca Roanhorse?
Let's see. I could tell you that I'm working on it right now.
Okay.
I was reading part of it this morning before we chatted. I could tell you that the book, which is something I think we mentioned once when we announced the series, but I think it's technically, but the book 2 does not pick up right where book 1 ended. Book 2 will jump forward in time. I won't tell anyone just yet how much time, though. I promise before the book comes out, people will know. But we intentionally have jumped the book forward in time a little bit. I guess a little similar to the way that, Andor in its second season jumped forward a bit from the first season. And then even within the second season, you have other time jumps. We decided to jump forward in part because of the kinds of stories we wanted to tell about the reign of the Empire and the eventual rise of the rebellion and this. It's a long story, right? It's a big story. It's an arc of there's 19 years between episode 3 and episode 4. And so wanting to put our arms around more than just 1 year of that story, right? Or more than just, 2 years of that story. So book 2 is going to jump forward. I can also tell you that some of the characters from the first book will return.
Okay.
There will also be new characters. And Rebecca's story is intentionally different than Alex Freed's story.
Okay.
And it's one of the reasons why when we built this series, that we didn't just build it with one author, but we built it with 3. Alexander Freed writing book 1,
Yep.
Rebecca Roanhorse is writing book 2 that comes out next year, and then the wonderful Fran Wilde is writing book 3 that comes out in 2027. And the reason that we did that was knowing that we were going to jump forward in time a little bit, knowing the idea too that, the way that the Empire exists in, say, the first year of its existence, the state of the galaxy, the kind of just what's going on in the galaxy, the state of any kind of rebellion, formal or otherwise, in the first year of the Empire, in the middle years of the Empire, at the end of the Empire, everywhere. The galaxy itself changes so much that we actually thought about leveraging the idea that by changing the authors, it actually then allows us to sort of change the tones and the approaches of the story.
Yep.
In a way that can sort of mirror the idea of the way that the galaxy changes. And so Rebecca is working with a lot of the same themes and ideas that Alexander Freed was working for. They're obviously changed and evolved as the story has evolved, but there are also new ideas and new themes and new things that become important in book 2 that are only important because that's actually becomes what's important in the galaxy at the time. And these things were not as important during the time that Alex was telling the story. And so it's intentionally going to have a different sort of feel to it, while still being cohesive to the idea of all of the efforts that needed to go into going from this is how liberty dies with thunderous applause all the way through to, oh my gosh, there's actually a rebellion. And oh my gosh, that rebellion could win.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. Those are sort of all the teases that I think I could give at the moment.
That was very generous.
Yes.
I'm very excited about it. I know that Rebecca is very excited about it. And I know that she was reading along with Mask of Fear as it was developing and stuff. And all the authors have been so generous with each other about, like, they're handing the batons off to each other, right? It's like, okay, and if actually, if you read the acknowledgments of the Mask of Fear, I think Alex Freed wrote something to the effect of, like, hope I didn't leave things too much a mess for you guys, and sort of handing these characters in this story off to the next group. And he absolutely did not. But it's a really fun process to watch and see, like, okay, we know where this character is at the end of Mask of Fear. What does that mean about where we pick them up in book 2, based on how much time has now passed and what we do? And how do we do things that might fit into the expectations a reader might have about what happens next? And how do we do things that might subvert those expectations, right?
Yeah.
And depending on what we're doing, how does that impact the kind of story we should tell? We're trying to play with all of those things in service to the same overall goal of being as intentional about this story as the thing that inspired it, which is Andor. It's not a direct tie into Andor. The series was never meant to be, but it was always meant to be inspired by the way they approach storytelling in Andor. And that is part and parcel.
I said it earlier, but you hit that goal. I mean, you hit that target. It really does feel like it fits perfectly within the Andor tone. And one of the things that I like going into season 2 of Andor, and Laura and I spoke of this. I don't know if it was on air or off air, but
hard to say.
Hard to say. But it's that idea that watching Mon Mothma go through things in Andor season 2, I was anchored with because of the things she went through in Mask of Fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like Rogue One is changed because of what happens in Andor season 1 and 2. Mon Mothma's character, Saw's character, Bail's character, all are colored and deepened because of what happened to Mask of Fear. And that just came through brilliantly for me. And I really love that kind of, like, what do they call it? Transmedia journey.
Mm-hmm.
I used a big word.
Yes, you did.
That's a very big word. And that's it's one of those wonderful things of you get to play it both ways, and you get to use what readers know about those characters to both reinforce things they know, but also to be like, you think you do. So, like, you watch Rogue One, you watch Andor, you watch any number of other things, and you watch the deleted scenes of Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
And you must imagine, Bail Organa and Mon Mothma are like besties, BFFs, best friends forever, right? They must have been. Well, why must we assume that across their entire careers and times together that they never once were in disagreement or even conflict with each other? Obviously, they're not like pew 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 shooting at each other, but
yes.
And especially at a moment in time, maybe where they're both going through a tremendous amount of personal and professional grief and uncertainty about what to do next. And oh, by the way, Bail Organa has the secret of all secrets in his head that he will never be able to share with Mon, right? About Leia and about his daughter and about some of the stuff related to the Jedi. And so that idea of like, oh, people imagine because of this other storytelling and because of what they know about the future, that Bail and Mon must have always been in lockstep. And that like Saw and Bail or Saw and Mon must have always been, the opposite, must have always been in conflict. Or that Saw must have always been this person completely on the fringe that no one ever found charismatic or no one ever like wanted to follow. And you being able to look at those future stories and then look at the characters and say, well, very few people are ever that one dimensional, right? Or very few people are ever like that static over this long an arc of time. So how can we explore elements of their character that are informed by those future stories, but are working in a way and in a space that would talk about who are they at this point of time,
right?
10 years, 20 years, 15 years, 8 years, whatever it ends up being between, story A and story B. And it was fun to be able to play around with stuff like that and to utilize that stuff.
Yeah, I really saw like Bail, Mon, and Saw as 3 different legs to the same stool. Like they all had kind of different approaches to it, but the stool can only stand if all 3 are there.
Yeah.
Yes. And they are also 3 pillars who, as they change and grow, it tells you something about how the galaxy is changing.
Yeah.
Because they're like the barometers.
Yes.
They're the things you can bounce off against because they are the things that you know. Like I know where Bail Organa is during Rogue One. Mm-hmm. So if I'm seeing him in the Mask of Fear and seeing what his character is like, that tells me something about the state of the galaxy because of how far he is from the character that we see briefly.
Totally.
Right? Same thing with Saw and Mon. And so in some ways, even if you're playing around with what people already know, you also get to lean into what you know about these characters and their future. We're sort of using them as the way to show the reader how close or far away are we from a rebel. Right. And we get to use the 3 of them because we know they all play a key role in that, right?
Yes.
And in the Mask of Fear, you can see, oh gosh, we are super far away from it. Not just because it says year 1, on the book, but just in the way that you see them interacting with each other, their own senses of duty or their own senses of action. And so, yes, they play very key roles almost as not just characters, but actual tools for the storytelling and for understanding where you are in the galaxy.
What are the top 3 elements that make Star Wars to you?
Oh, yikes. No. Okay. This is easy. This is easy because it's literally my job to talk to authors about this.
That's true. That's true.
One, it sounds trite to say, but intrinsically Star Wars is a story that is about hope. And even these stories which are the most quote unquote realistic or gritty or grounded or violent or very, serious and let's say reflective of the real world or a kind of, reflection of reality, even those stories are never just like violent to be violent or challenging stories to be challenged. They all inevitably turn themselves back to hope. And so ultimately a Star Wars story, no matter how dark it might get, no matter how serious it might get, no matter how kind of adult or serious and somber the themes that you are exploring are, it ultimately still needs to be a story about hope in some form, even if, it is hope that is tempered or hope that is, not looked through with rose-colored glasses or whatever. If it doesn't include hope as part of the storytelling, it's not so. It's just not. The second thing that makes a story Star Wars is the way in which Star Wars approaches science and technology. Mm-hmm. In the way that science and technology in Star Wars are used to inform and create and help drive the storytelling. The storytelling, though, is not itself dictated by like the realities of technology and science, right? One of the things that people constantly ask me, you'll see people writing about online, is just like, well, how long does it take to get between this planet and that planet? And you will have heard, it's something that is said all the time, is that like actually speed of the plot is something that matters more in Star Wars than like, well, it takes this amount of time to go from here to here, this amount of time to go from here to here. So that is a way in which that differentiates Star Wars from, say, Star Trek, which has more structures and traditions within its storytelling framework about science and how then science informs things like travel and distance and the kind of technology that can exist or not exist, or how technology exists. Star Wars often does not explain all of its technology, beyond the kind of the base amount you need to kind of buy into the fact that, okay, this thing does X. And then ultimately the story is about why, what happens if it does X or why we should stop it from doing that, right? Not exactly the mechanics of it. And that is actually an important part of what defines Star Wars, because some storytelling worlds and traditions are very like science heavy, rules heavy, real world, physics heavy, and some are not. And Star Wars exists more on that space fantasy sort of continuum, right? The third thing that makes Star Wars, Star Wars is really truly deeply informed by the kinds of adventure serialized stories and, serials that inspired folks like George Lucas and other people who then created the original Star Wars. And that kind of adventurous DNA and that hopeful sort of DNA and that kind of sense of wonder and adventure is also intrinsic to Star Wars. Again, that doesn't mean you can't tell a story that is going to take a more somber or reflective direction, or is going to eschew just swashbuckling action for something a bit more, again, quote unquote, grounded or gritty or real, but that none of that is ever still lost. There are still going to be moments of high adventure and levity baked into it because Star Wars is an adventure. And it's work to balance those things, right? To make sure that the adventure is not trivializing something somber or true about the experience of living that you want to reflect, but also at the same time that you don't entirely lose that from Star Wars. I think it's something about like those three things roughly. And those are the kinds of things that I'm always talking to authors about, always making sure we have balance. Never get away from one of these things too much, never over index inside, like never put all of your egg, like never only make it about that, because then you're kind of going to be duplicative of something that came before, or it's going to just feel kind of generic Star Wars, right? Instead of being its own specific star, it's not going to have its own reason to exist. But those, to me, I think are the three elements.
That's fantastic.
Wow.
I like to like that the technology aspect. I think you're right on. I've been working on a concept where Star Wars is actually steampunk 2.0, where it's just kind of divergent from 1977 technology where it was all analog. But yeah, great three elements. For our final question for you, we've talked about your Star Wars journey from the beginning, where it kind of always just existed, the loss of 2 of the VHS and having to watch Return of the Jedi over and over. Your first book experience, which was I, Jedi, which is you called Revenge of the Sith unicorn of books, but I think that I, Jedi was a unicorn of an experience for you when it comes to Star Wars books. And then working with all these writers to kind of shepherd the story, to hold the Star Wars broom, just like the kid in The Last Jedi pulled the broom towards him and wiped the ice as the authors push their story towards the finish line. After spending the past hour and a half talking about all that, can you say now what does Star Wars mean to you?
Star Wars, and I didn't share this earlier, but it is part of what Star Wars mean to me, is that for the longest time, Star Wars was actually a kind of singular, solitary thing for me. So when I was growing up, while there were tons of people that I experienced watching the movies with, or, going to the movies to see special editions with, when it came to the books, I actually did not have a lot of other people who experienced the non-film parts of Star Wars along. Because again, growing up in the 90s, there are not even quite to message boards yet. There are not Discord channels that I can join. There are not Twitter communities or, Facebook groups or anything that I can go out and join and find people who were as into the novels as I was. So for a lot of my young experience of Star Wars, a lot of the formative experience of Star Wars, it was kind of the solitary thing. If I talk about the movies with my friends or my relatives or whatever, then I didn't really want to talk about the books with. Then every once in a while, someone would ask a question about something that the Star Wars movies in there. And I'd say, well, in this book, blah, 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 blah. And I get to share something, explain something. But it was just, I experienced Star Wars kind of as a solitary thing for a really long time, which I actually was totally fine with. I didn't lament it, but it was just how I experienced it. And even once connected fandoms became a thing, I didn't really join them. I was kind of like a person who like stood at the outside of the, school dance, just watching the people who were dancing, not actually digging kind of thing, that kind of thing. So Star Wars to me has always been a very deeply personal thing because of that fact that I was mostly experiencing it myself. And it has remained that even as it's now widened to me being a part of this larger community of readers and being a very small part of the group of custodians who are adjacent to the people who are creating stories in Star Wars. So even though it is broad in that way, it's remained this deeply personal thing, but it's taken on an added meaning of personal satisfaction because it is part of the end of a long journey that I took wanting to get into publishing and to become an editor. And as I said, one of the very ridiculous things that I said at the beginning of that journey was, I'm going to go work on Star Wars.
Yeah.
So the fact that I am sort of dart hitting the bullseye situation means that Star Wars itself is sort of now intrinsically linked with like my own personal satisfaction and success at my career choices and my personal journey as like wanting to, have a gratifying or fulfilling career or anything like that. So beyond all the actual stories, it means that. And then it means all these different people that I have come into contact with now getting to contribute, in a very minor way to Star Wars. All of the different authors, all of the other people in professional capacities and personal capacities, all the different readers, people that I meet when I go to conventions, like all of those things. Star Wars is very much less about the stories that it tells and more about the people that it connects you to when you are experiencing those stories. That's pretty much what it is now.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's really fantastic. I can't, your point of view and your joy of the franchise of Star Wars, of the universe, makes me really glad that you're the story
shaper,
the editor of the shaper. Yeah, it's hard to kind of I understand
the clay.
Yeah, how you are the molder of the clay. You help shape these things, and I also understand how you let your authors fly as well. Mm-hmm. And it's a unique kind of position of creative. So what I'm saying is, I think you're doing a terrific job. Having read a lot of the books in the past 10 years, I think they're fantastic.
And thank you for sharing it with us.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
That's very kind. I definitely one of like a very small part of a very large group of people who actually makes all of this happen. But I appreciate that. And, it's all informed by the fact that like before I worked on this stuff, I was a reader. Mm-hmm. And when I set out to make these books and contribute to making these books, I just think about, well, what books would I want to read if I was a reader?
Yeah.
And I mean, I still am a reader. It's like, what books do I want to read as a reader? And what books does this author want to tell because they were a reader, they are a reader, imagine themselves as a reader. And then from there, we just cross our fingers and we're like, well, if us as readers want to read these, hopefully other people do, right? And like, it's kind of like the simplest way to do it. But I appreciate that a lot. It's really great. It's a lot of fun. It's really gratifying. And it's a thing that I know that nobody who works on it in any capacity ever takes for granted. Because we all know that we're only the custodians of this thing. And I always use that word really intentionally. It's custodian. I don't own this thing. I'm a custodian. Yeah. We only get to be custodians of this thing for a short amount of time in the aggregate, which is great because it's actually lovely then that new people get to contribute in different ways. And it's what helps make something like Star Wars last and what makes it better over time. Mm-hmm. So I am deeply appreciative of getting to be the custodian that I am for however much time that I get to do it. Which is not like, I'm not like leaving tomorrow or anything, but like at some point I won't. And that actually will be okay because that means that somebody else will get to do it and hopefully do it better than I did. Even if I did an okay job, just because it's always good when things get better.
Tom, where can people find you?
Well, if I'm not on my couch playing Lord of the Rings.
Hopefully not there. Let's not stalk Tom as close. Do not invite yourself to his Lord of the Rings parties. That's very rude.
Damn it.
No. Listen, if people ever visiting my neck of the galaxy, we're always happy to have a guest or two for that. You can find me in a few places. You can find me on either Blue Sky or Twitter as Darth Internus, INTERNOUS. Or if you happen to follow along with the Star Wars by Random House Worlds or any other Random House Worlds sort of social media stuff, I don't run those accounts, but I'm connected to them. So if you want to keep up with the work I'm doing. And then if you're ever at a convention like New York Comic Con or San Diego Comic Con or Star Wars Celebration, and you come by the Star Wars Books booth, chances are I am chained to the table, hanging out talking about. No, I'm not actually chained to the table. It's the best part of the job. But I'm usually there. So if you ever come on one of the shows,
Nice.
please come by, say hi to me, say hi to the rest of the team. We love talking to people, so don't be shy. Like, we have to stand there for like 4 or 5 days straight. So it's really lovely to have people to talk to. It helps pass the time and make us forget how much like our knees hurt from, standing or whatever. So I'm actually,
Awesome.
we're recording this in early June. So San Diego Comic Con's only like 6 weeks away. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Be fun.
And all those social links will be in the podcast notes so people can just jump right down and connect directly to them. And I want to tell you again, this is now one of my favorite lines. Thank you for joining us because we are here because you are here. Tom, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you too. Thank you so much. It was lovely being here. I deeply appreciate the invitation, and I'll come back anytime you want to chat about this.